Hello and welcome to The Arise Interview, 60 glorious minutes of multifaceted discussion where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and we feature the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniegolu. Coming up in the next hour, he's fearless, outspoken and unquestionably one of Nigeria's leading social and civil rights activists, a defender of the downtrodden. But through it all, Bishop Matthew Kukah has anchored and sustained his life and work on a spiritual base and on a consistent life ethic, that morality must be based on a holistic reverence for all life and respect for not some, but everyone in it. My guest today, Bishop Matthew Kukah, in a moment. Now, whatever you say about Bishop Matthew Kukah, Roman Catholic Bishop of Sokoto, a diocese situated at the heart of Muslim northern Nigeria, no one can deny that he's a man who has an acute social conscience. His protests against corruption and injustice in Nigeria have earned him both scorn and admiration. His own form of militancy and spirituality in the service of social and political justice have put him in the national spotlight. His sharp intellect and wit, his academic achievements, and his prolific authorship of many books have made him famous and brought both national and international recognition. But who is he? Where has he come from? Who is he today, and how did he get there? In a moment, we'll speak to the bishop himself. But first, here he is with one of his recent public utterances speaking out against ethnic hostilities.
When I looked at my passport, it has a federal coat of arms, then the map of Nigeria, then right in front of the data page where all my information is, I have the Benin. I'm not a Benin man, but I'm eminently proud of this. I didn't even know it was here because I had to go through the passport page by page. Then the first thing I see is Zumaro. Then I see thief dancers. Who gave them permission to put thief dancers? Then I see the next page before I come to this poor Fulani man who is standing with his hand. Suddenly, this is the only thing we have chosen. And why is it exciting? It is exciting because this is a time for us to quote unquote hate, literally tag every Fulani as a headsman. We are on a very dangerous precipice.
And I'm delighted to say that the remarkable Bishop Matthew Kukah joins me now in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for coming in, Bishop. We're very honored to have you here. And just taking off from what you were saying there before we get into your background and so on, the issue of violence between herdsmen and farmers in Nigeria, it's been an explosive issue. How does that play into the religious and ethnic fault line in Nigeria from your assessment? Do you see it as economic, or is it the ethnicity and religion that is in that fray?
Thank you very much. You know, Charles, you ask a very deep question. And because this is not a country that privileges intellect, and this is not a country that engages in diagnosis. The result then is that sometimes you find people in very high offices, bishops or priests or ministers and so on, people who ought to know. And their views are not too different from the views on the streets. Maybe on a short term, that sounds very important. But I think the deeper issues are that we are dealing with a situation. Our situation in Nigeria is complex. I often say to people, there's nowhere in the world where you have the situation we have between Muslims and Christians in Nigeria. Because everywhere else in the world, from the Middle East right across Indonesia, everywhere, you either have a 90% Muslim population, a 10% or 5% Christian population. Nigeria is the only country where you have almost a 50-50 percentage of Christians and Muslims. And I think that we could have resolved a lot of these issues.
So do you think that split creates more problems? Is that why there is that schism?
It does create challenges, in part because of the nature of Islam and how it perceives governance, secularity, and all the principles of democracy. This is a huge challenge, both for Muslims themselves, but even more so in plural societies. When you listen to the stories, for example, in predominantly Muslim countries like Algeria, Sudan, and so on and so forth, it's that even in an environment that is totally Islamic, the Saudis don't have a constitution, for example. The Holy Quran is their constitution, but they are unable to deal with the issues of managing pluralism and diversity. So critical to all this in Nigeria is a situation where you have quite a substantial percentage of Muslims, especially in northern Nigeria, and more so those who have really not had the exposure of being exposed to others through education, urbanization, and so on and so forth, who are still locked in a world that has moved on. But they're still somehow imagining that there is going to be one day an Islamic State that is possible. Tragically, right from independence, if you go back and read Lord Lugard's speech in 1903, one of the things that, at the end of the conquest of Sokoto Caliphate, there were issues. There were those who believed that, look, we can do business with these people and just bid our time. There were those who said, that is, the Sultan then, who said, no, we've got to fight these people to the death. And that's why he died fighting. Now, unfortunately, we've not been able to reconcile those worldviews, even within the Muslim community itself. So the greatest challenge is the Western liberal, multicultural dimensions of Christianity sitting side by side with a percentage of Muslims who believe that somehow, and you heard it from a lot of the debates about the Constitution of Nigeria from 1979 up till the things are, the issues remain unresolved. What kind of country do we want to live in? And there is a substantial body of Muslims who believe that the state that we have now doesn't approximate the principles of their religion.
Right, but is that percentage of Muslims, are they to be found just in the northern part of Nigeria? Because if you look at the southwest of Nigeria, the Yorubas are almost equally split between Christians and Muslims, but they don't appear to have any conflict. I mean, what's the difference there? What are they doing right?
Well, there is the anthropological argument. There's also the theological argument, which is that the Yorubas, for example, privilege being a Yoruba over and above everything. And theologically, their worldview admits that it is the gods that decide which of them you're going to worship. They admit of a multiplicity of gods. And so in early rituals, when a child is born, it's left for the gods to decide whom you are going to worship. And if you take up from that point of view, you can understand why the Yorubas have been able to incubate a certain level of tolerance. Right? Over and above that is their appreciation of Western education. So the average Muslim in the southwest of Nigeria is principally Yoruba, and he will fight to the death to defend his being a Yoruba person, and considers both Islam and Christianity more or less superimpositions. They are important, but they're not as important as being Yoruba. And I think that has created a rather enviable worldview. But over and above that is their predisposition towards Western education. Now, no Yoruba Muslim has had any reservations about the importance of Western education. Unfortunately, the debate in northern Nigeria still remains. And this is where the northern elites are culpable. And really, in my view, their culpability borders on criminality. Let me put it that way. Because the average northern elite, whether they are senators, ministers, all their children are in some of the best schools in outside this country or within this country. And the real challenge, as you know, with other ethnic groups in Nigeria is that everyone has always had the urgency of doing something for their community. Now, what you find in the southern part of Nigeria and other parts of Nigeria, where people are going around, they're building hospitals, they're building clinics, they're building, providing social services for their communities. You don't find the same sense of community in northern Nigeria. So here you are, and the arguments are coming out very clearly that it sounds strange, but it is as if maybe keeping these people illiterate, which coincides with their poverty, it's actually very important. And this is why you now have this dubious spirituality in northern Nigeria, where people love their religion over and above simply being, getting on in life. So whereas the Igbos, for example, would say, look, I'm going to have to keep running because I have to be something in my life. The average beggar on the street of northern Nigeria tells you, he says, Allah baka kabane, that is, may God give you so that you will give me. Now, when you have those kind of people living in the same house, these are some of the areas where the tensions exist in Nigeria.
Now, talking about living in that house, I mean, you are the Roman Catholic bishop in Sokoto, which is arguably the very heart of the Muslim sort of caliphate in Nigeria. I mean, how much of a challenge has it been propagating your religion as a very small minority within this majority that you have so aptly described? I'm exceptionally lucky, and sometimes the more you try to think about this, the more you probably find
reason to rationalize or whatever. But I think God has just been extraordinarily good to me. I mean, before I got to Sokoto, I was already, my name was pretty well known in northern Nigeria, in part because I was writing for the most prestigious newspaper in northern Nigeria, and it's a spectacular newspaper, the New Nigerian. And everywhere I turn in northern Nigeria, up till today, I went to see the Emir of Katsina, for example, and he says to me, look, I'm so happy that you're here, that even though I'm supposed to speak to you sitting down, I will speak to you standing up because Bishop Kukah is in my palace. He said, look, when I was young, I used to go to every length to read the New Nigerian. Now here I was writing a Christian column, but I had a huge following that was literally unknown to me among the Muslims. So I had a certain level of name recognition before getting to northern Nigeria. I mean, before getting to Sokoto. And when I was appointed, my friend Adamu, former Minister for Education, sent me a text. In the text, he says, "Congratulations, the Sultan of Christians." And I arrived Sokoto, having already met and known the Sultan in his days as one of the members of the people in NIPS. I already had a lot of people that I knew. So I arrived Sokoto and I find an incredible environment of warmth. Indeed, during my installation, it was very interesting. I mean, our people were struggling, to do the road and clear the place and so on and so forth. And everybody wanted something to do, from the governor to everybody. And I think that coming from northern Nigeria has also given me an added advantage. I've lived with Muslims. My father was, and my grandfather before my father, they're all very close to Muslims. So
But they were all Christians.
Well, my father was baptized at the end of his life, but these people were not Christians, and I would never for the life of me understand how and why they never became Muslim. And I guess I borrowed from that substantially, which is that religion shouldn't be the first thing on the table.
Right.
And that these people had built absolute trust in my father, and they just kept coming and going from our house, and we weren't rich. So you have a huge body of ordinary people in northern Nigeria who just want to get on with their life. Extraordinarily decent people.
Right.
Okay. What has happened in northern Nigeria, sadly, is the politics.
Sure. Okay. Just finish your thoughts there.
Yeah, is that politics has
unfortunately, we have to take a break.
Yes, politics has become so toxic.
20 seconds.
Yes, politics has become toxic. And it's become toxic because the northern political elite continue to take advantage of religion, which they themselves live in Dubai. But they are imposing strict religious moral codes on their ordinary people. That is what has given us the tragedy of Zamfara today.
Okay, we're going to talk more about your life and your work in a minute. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with one of Nigeria's leading intellectuals and civil rights activists, Bishop Matthew Kukah. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniegolu. Now, to say that Bishop Matthew Kukah is an intellectual powerhouse is to put it mildly. He has a Bachelor of Divinity degree from the Pontifical Urban University in Rome, a master's degree in peace studies from the University of Bradford in the UK, and a PhD from the University of London. He also attended the University of Ibadan in Nigeria, Oxford University in England, and Harvard University in the US. In addition, he's written several books, and apart from his books, there are over 5,000 works to his name of articles, presentations, papers in academic journals, and numerous other research submissions. And his byline can be traced to virtually every newspaper in Nigeria from 1980 to the present. Before we continue our chat with Bishop Matthew Kukah, let's take a listen to some more of his public pronouncements on the state of the Nigerian nation, this time talking about the Boko Haram problem in the northeast.
The question Nigerians should be asking, and Nigerians love to say, we didn't know that Nigerians could blow themselves up because of this. Yes, they are blowing themselves up because somebody is offering them something higher than what the Nigerian state is offering them. That should be your problem. It's like saying, because if you might say, I never imagined that my own son will leave my house and go sleep in somebody else's house for a week. Well, if you've not been feeding your child, he sees he has no future with you,
he will trade his loyalties. And I think essentially that is what has happened to Nigeria.
Bishop Matthew Kukah is still with me in the studio. We'll talk about all of that in a minute, but let's get a sense of where you have come from. Let's go back to the very beginning. You were born in Zangon Kataf in Kaduna State. What was your childhood like? Was it rich? Was it poor? Was it somewhere in between?
I don't know. But first of all, I wasn't born even in Zangon Kataf. Zangon Kataf is it's a small location that got its name from the crisis of 1992. But in reality, it's one of those very strange things, because the Kataf people, like I said in an article in The Guardian trying to explain where we were, the Kataf people don't have a Zango. They don't live in Zango. Zango was a station created, trade post, you know, for Muslims and so on. And it assumed a life of its own. And some of the internal economic, cultural disparities that emerged from there were finally what threw up Zangon Kataf crisis. But so it's a local government, but in reality, I come from a very small ethnic group, really, really very small. It's called Ikulu. And my village is, again, even within, by Kaduna standards, very difficult to find my village on the map of Kaduna. So, and for me, these are some of the most humbling things when I look back at my life and where I have traveled and how where I've gotten to where I am today. And so when I was growing up...
But you are from Kaduna State.
I'm from Kaduna State,
right.
Yes.
And your locality, where
my village is called Anchuna. Anchuna is not too far from a place called Kachia if you're on the highway.
Right. So it's not actually, it's not part of Zangon Kataf.
It's Zangon Kataf local government.
Okay, Zangon Kataf
the
local.
Politics of Zangon Kataf local government, being one of the biggest local governments in Nigeria, is a story for another day. But to answer your question, I mean, I come from a very, very rural, and it's still very, very rural today, community. Indeed, people come to my village and they say, "Is this where you were born?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "How come it's still looking like this?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I've not been minister, I've not been president, I've not been, you know." So, but it's that I came from that small community, and when we were, our grandmother, went to Kaduna, and she came back with all these stories about Kaduna. We just heard about Kaduna and it was like now looking back, now hearing about London or Hollywood or what. And we had this ambition of going to Kaduna because our grandmother came back, was telling us this story, you know, like, there's no darkness in Kaduna. If you like to live in darkness, that's okay. But there is something on the wall. When you touch it, light just comes. We've never seen electricity before. And my greatest ambition then was to go to Kaduna. Really, I mean, truly, that was the greatest ambition I had. And somehow I ended up getting to school.
And about how old were you then?
I probably was about 6, 7, and then I got very close to, I spent a good part of my life with my grandmother. And then that got me to see a priest for the first time, a white man. And he became himself very fond of me. So we used to jump into his vehicle and so on. And then one day I said to my grandmother, and I like to be like this man, because by this time now I'm about 8 or 9, and altar server and so on. And my grandmother says, "Well, how can you be a priest?" And I said, "Well, you know, this is what," he says, "I hear that it is possible." And he said, "No, but what about this black skin?" And I said, "Well, I hear it doesn't matter." She I said, was not a Christian. And it's a long story, but I finally then get very close to the missionaries, and then finally managed to get myself to school. And when I look back at the number of people I went to school with, and there's many that fell by the wayside, I passed the common entrance to go to St. John's. And man, if you came from the part of Nigeria I came from, going to St. John's in Kaduna, where Nzogu went to, it was like going to Oxford.
It was a big deal.
It was a big deal.
Yeah.
And we sat for the exam, and of all, you know, in the whole of the locality around that area, I was the only one who passed. And so it was really big celebration. And then, of course, I sat for a second examination to go to the seminary. And I passed the examination to the seminary. And I come back and I said, "Look, I'm not going to go to St. John's." Again, it's a story for another day. But it was big. How would you not want to go to St. John's? And I said, "No, I want to go to the seminary." I get to the seminary, one thing leads to the other, and that's how really my life changed.
And did you ever waver in that pursuit of priesthood?
No, you know, strange enough.
I'd like to, find a nice young lady, marry her, settle down with her.
Yeah, but I don't think, looking back now, I was so focused. It was actually in my final year in the seminary, I was getting very good grades. And it was in my final year that we were actually shocked to be told that, you know what, you can actually want to to go to the major seminary and not go if you are not recommended. And I thought, you know, but it's not like I'm hearing the voice of God, but this is really what I want to do, and I have no plan B. And then suddenly my world is about to collapse because I don't know, am I going to be recommended? Then a cousin of mine comes along and says, you know what are you thinking of doing? I said, I don't know, but this is this is where I've made my investment. Then something came to my mind. I said, okay, you know what, if this doesn't happen, my cousin said, the School of Aviation is next door to us, you can go and be a pilot. And I said, no, I'm not interested in being a pilot. Happily, you know, I got recommended, I went to the seminary, and that's how my life has been.
That's quite extraordinary. Of course, being a priest never stopped you from making huge academic strides. I mean, you have a Bachelor of Divinity, as I mentioned in the intro, from Rome, master's degree in peace studies, you know, attended Oxford, Harvard, all of that. So much in academia.
You know, Charles, frankly, even when you were saying some of these things, the hair on my head was, you know, because I'm wondering, I said, is this me you're talking about? But let me tell you, you know, these are not things I've sat down to think about, in part because maybe when you start thinking, I've always been afraid of thinking, because I'm like, if you think, maybe you might ascribe it to somebody else, maybe, oh, you're intelligent, or you have whatever. But you just see, and I have learned from all this, the fact that you must never attempt to take the steering from the hands of God. Because I have never, a lot of the things people say about me, I hear them in shock, because frankly, cross my heart, I'm not a very brilliant person. I think I'm slightly above average. The only thing is that I work hard. And
you have a thirst for knowledge.
Yes, and I think that 90%, maybe not 90%, but 60-70% of the things that have made me who I am today, I picked them on the streets from just contact with people. And I was extraordinarily lucky. People say to me, but you know, how come other people are not talking? I got talking a bit early, in part because I like to talk, but also very importantly, I found out that it was easier for me to write sometimes than to talk. But a lot of people say to me now, you know, you are lucky, you can talk and you can write. But it's that when I look back now and I see how the trajectory of my life has moved, there are people I just bumped into purely by accident, and it's one thing leading to the other. But unlike what gave me a sense of urgency that perhaps a good number of my other friends don't have, who are priests and who are better than me and who are more brilliant than I am, is the exposure. I didn't go to, after my seminary training, I didn't go to Catholic universities. Our seminary was affiliated to the Urban University in Rome. So, but I went to secular universities. And being in secular universities, I also developed a network of friends. Some who came looking for me, let me put it that way, in admiration for the things I was saying. And among these groups were all kinds of characters, let me put it that way. Some good, some not so good in the public eye. And I was friends of, and I'm still friends of, whether they are communists, whether they are, it didn't really matter to me what people believed. And I think that as a result of that, it has made me very comfortable in my own skin. And this is why, as I say, religion is important for me, but I'm still convinced that it should not be the defining identity.
But you chose to become a Catholic, to the exception of other Christian denominations.
I had no experience of other Christian denominations.
Right.
In any case, in my village, for example, I mean, we had the Ekwa. And in communities, they define all these churches. So people around my communities, and up till now, still spend a lot of time. They drink the local alcohol called burkutu. And so the Ekwa people were a bit strict. And they said, look, no, you can't touch any of this and be a Christian. And so the distinction that used to be made was, do you go to the church that doesn't drink or the one that drinks?
Okay, right.
But in my community, I really didn't have that opportunity of choosing either or. I just grew up, found myself in the Catholic Church, and I grew to love it by the day. And my own experience, the reading of history, the reading of theology, my own understanding of the Catholic Church just brought me to a point in which I know that it is almost impossible to find another church like the Catholic Church. Well, I'm not talking here in terms of behavior.
Sure.
I'm talking about the fact that this is the church that Jesus Christ founded. After that, every other church that has emerged after that has been the result of people saying, this is what Jesus said I should do. So from the Anglican Church right down to everybody, and I take nothing away from everything.
Right.
But,
But nevertheless,
yes.
I mean, that Catholic Church that is the beating heart, if you like, of your faith,
Right.
is currently experiencing, in a country like Nigeria, considerable competition from other Pentecostal and, if you like, non-conformist churches, with their attendance growing every day. I mean, as a leading Catholic, do you see that as a threat?
Guess what? As I said, I'm exceptionally lucky. There's a pastor, a very famous pastor. I won't call his name, but he severally tried to get me to go to his church and to go. And he says to me, "Look, just come and preach in my church on Sunday." And I said to him, "Look, if I came to your church on Sunday, I'll come with a mass box to celebrate mass." He said, "Bishop, just come. I just want to see you physically in my church. You can celebrate mass. We will attend. We just want you to be physically with us."
Right. Okay.
Now,
I'm just going to ask you to hold it there. We'll continue that chat in a
Right.
minute. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the remarkable Bishop Matthew Kukah. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now, our guest today is Bishop Matthew Hassan Kukah, Bishop of Sokoto in the heart of Muslim northwest Nigeria, a man who, though a Catholic priest, has built friendships and alliances across religious lines, winning accolade and recognition from all sides. His ecumenical doctrines and practices reach beyond Christianity, spreading wide and helping to build peace amongst Christians, Muslims, and animists. To some, Bishop Matthew Kukah is a beacon of hope. To others, he's a radical disciple, espousing a renegade faith. But to many, he's a star, a media commentator and moral advocate who's enjoyed a long career in the public eye. We'll speak to him some more in a moment, but first of all, here he is, unapologetically espousing his views on a topical Nigerian issue, Boko Haram in the northeast.
Because they've turned Boko Haram into a military operation, the problem is resolved around bullets and guns. And if bullets and guns were a guarantee for security, then the northeast should be the most peaceful part of Nigeria. My view is that we need to go back to the causative factors, all right? And a lot of those things are also about dreams deferred. They are about goals not met. And Boko Haram, the tragedy with Boko Haram and the tragedy with our analysis is that we've actually lost the text, because a lot of the conversation that the issues Boko Haram were the kind of issues they were talking about were not too different from the kind of issues that you could hear in on a good sermon on a Sunday from a bishop like myself or from the ordinary priest. Namely, how do you resolve the contradiction and the distortion of the criminal inequalities? How do you resolve the issues of a society that is so richly endowed in deepening poverty, is living side by side with stupendous wealth? These were the critical questions Boko Haram tried to ask before it became a criminal enterprise.
And Bishop Matthew Kukah is still with me in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. Let's just look at some current developments in Nigeria.
We're talking about the Pentecostal churches.
Yeah, but I want to move on. I want to move on from that. If we have time, we'll go back to. Actually, if you want to, you can finish.
No, I think.
Yeah, finish that thought, and then we'll move on.
Because 2 days ago, we were at a discussion with journalists, some of the most reputable journalists in Nigeria, Funke, all, and the issue was hate speech. But then this point came up about citizenship or citizen journalism, which is that with the social media now everybody is a reporter. And it was interesting to hear journalism, real mainline journalists saying, you know what, you cannot be a citizen and be a journalist, because you want to be a journalist, go train and become one of us. You cannot appropriate our power. And I'm like, okay, right. So I
saw a connection there.
Yeah, I saw a connection there. I said, look, I can sit here. It used to be said in the Catholic Church that outside the Catholic Church there's no salvation. That's what we said. But you cannot take away, if somebody tells me Jesus has told him to do X, Y, Z, as long as it's not criminal, as far as I'm concerned, the Spirit of God cannot be restrained. And for me, I have had, as I said, invitations to go to Pentecostal church. And when I can, I do go. Because I think fundamentally we must learn to respect that God has not shared his glory with anybody else in a way, a manner that suggests that I'm the regulator of the power of God. And I think intrinsically you must measure every claim or every action by the quality of, does it meet, does it improve our human condition. So for me, those are the issues. We can have a big debate as to, do I feel threatened by Pentecostals? No, I don't. I am happy that the house of God is blooming. In the final day, Jesus said it himself. At harvest time, he will decide who is real and who is not real. But for now, I am very happy that people are increasingly going to the churches and becoming Christian. That for me is what is most important.
Well, that point is well taken. But let's talk about, just on the back of your clip there that we heard at the outset on Boko Haram, let's talk about current developments in Nigeria around security. Because recently, former President Olusegun Obasanjo, once again writing a withering letter, his critics would say withering letter, to President Buhari, criticizing his handling of security in the country and warning of impending doom if he failed to arrest that situation. What is your reaction to that?
You know why I'm laughing? I don't want to name names, but I have had such a long career in Nigerian politics. A lot of these things I just laugh. I laugh because of what I know. Because people who felt vehemently against, who stood vehemently against me for particular positions, a few kilometers down the road, turn around to me and they say, what did you see that the rest of us didn't see? Now, President Obasanjo and I, we've had our own arguments, but at the beginning of this whole conversation, I remember President Obasanjo saying to me, somewhere in Ethiopia, the Emir of Kano was there, he says to me, he said, we're fighting corruption, like a new dawn is here. How come you're not so enthusiastic? I was accused of not being fully in support of President Buhari. The Messiah has now come. How come you're not? People say, oh, Jonathan bought a house, built a house for me, did all kinds of things. This is why I'm not so. And I said, wait a minute. I have enough understanding of politics to say that Nigeria is not looking for a Messiah. Okay, because even if a Messiah appears today, the Muslim Messiah will not be the same with the Christian Messiah. The Catholic Messiah may not be with the same with the Messiah of the Pentecostal church. So I abhor some of those categorizations. Now, what President Obasanjo is saying today, this is about a few years down the line. The things he said and the things he thought about this administration were completely different. But I take a more philosophical position, which is that, look, this government under Buhari, there's no doubt, and no matter how much you love this president, you must address the fact that there are too many opportunities we have allowed to pass. The support that President Buhari got from southern intellectuals and from friends of mine who threaten all kinds of things. Now everything has come on stock, in part because of our inability to manage diversity. Now, when you see where we are now with the security conversation, for me it's a symptom of a lot of other things, which is just like a lot of other government policies. I mean, how do you justify the fact that, and we've been talking about this for years, how do you justify the fact that unless the president has another agenda that the rest of us don't understand, and we want to take him by his word, but that if you're moving this country forward, how do you reject the notion of managing pluralism in a way? It cannot be the case that only northern Muslims who are in the security agencies understand how to run the security of this country. And guess what? We are hemorrhaging so badly that this is actually an indictment of the policies you have on the ground. So what Obasanjo is saying merely validates the anxieties that some of us had. But when you raise some of these issues, oh, you don't like the president, you don't. And Nigerians, luckily for me, because I'm not a contractor and because I've got no favors I'm looking for, and because I've not called anybody at 1 a.m. to say, please, can you do X, Y, and Z, I've stayed long enough in the terrain to know that we must constantly engage everybody who becomes a president or governor, an appointed person, allowing for the fact, even if it's my blood brother, I must assume that once you get to that seat, there will be a lot of other factors around you. So in my position, I think that is generally the position of the Catholic Church, that we must remain engaged in the process.
Now, one of the recommendations in that letter is for the government to urgently convene a sovereign national convention, as it was put, to help chart a new, more inclusive future for the dozens of ethnic groups in Nigeria, a country that's been riven with ethnic divisions and rivalries, not least about how to equitably share the country's resources and political power. Is there a sense that those simmering resentments are growing louder by the day, or less so?
Charles, this is not a new conversation. While President Obasanjo was still in prison, as the Wole cast, the Falanas and everybody around, what were we debating? We were debating the issue called the Sovereign National Conference by whatever name. But we said we must talk. Now, where we are now is evidence of what we will continue to experience unless we establish a clinical break with our military past. You know, today that we still have a military president, along with the Obasanjos of this world, is that, these people they cannot understand democratic processes, because democracy for them is a nuisance. And in a way, it's not what President Obasanjo is saying is not new. That is the need for us to talk. Now, we've been on this road for such a long time. Now, the guys who are in APC, a lot of my friends who are in APC did say that change, among other things, will include having this conversation. Again, people are on the other side now, and they see things completely differently. It is just to say that principally, for the average politician in Nigeria, it is power, more power, and power. And we will continue on this road, and this tension will persist.
Is that why you think this government, because most people don't think of Buhari as your typical politician? I mean, that's probably why they voted for him. I mean,
well, I mean, yes, people thought so, but what we think is not the same with what we are now experiencing. Whether it's the war against corruption or whether it's, for me, the most critical thing, and I've made this point severally, we have to figure out how do we manage diversity. You are familiar with Western institutions. Governments have to deliberately make the point that others can be in the room. When Bush appointed Colin Powell, he sent out a signal. Most of that, it was Republican. But by the time you get to Condoleezza Rice, by the time you've already prepared the way to Obama. Now, forget about what Trump is doing or saying. The fact that now, when I was in England in 1986, there were only about 3 or 4 black people who were in members of parliament. Nigeria alone has about 7 people in parliament that are of Nigerian descent. Nothing has changed, but people are feeling increasingly more confident, and they're investing emotionally. So when a country rejects the notion of managing diversity, because when you put so much power in the hands of one ethnic group, you prepare them for the kill, so to say. And most of the conversation we're having about Fulanis, about all this, is just a conversation by another name. Those who cannot approach Buhari directly and say that they are not happy with what is
right.
They've taken, it is the average Fulani man with his cattle that has become a victim. So for me, we have missed a lot of opportunity. I talk to my friends who are in government. Sadly, many people whom I know, we were on the road together. Again, as I said, the saying about Abuja, there's a guy who used to make a lot of noise. When he got an appointment in Abuja, and his friends called him and they said, "Oh boy, we don't hear anything again from you." He said, no, in Abuja there are table manners. You don't talk while you're eating. You don't talk while you're eating. It's that when people get co-opted into this process, it becomes a question of loyalty to an individual, loyalty to party, loyalty to... This country is bigger than President Buhari, and he knows. He's here today, in another 3 years he'll be gone. Now, the question that many of us are asking is, this is our country, and we have earned every right to be critical of government.
Absolutely.
And so for me, these are some of the very critical issues.
I'm going to ask you to hold it there. Brilliant conversation. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we learn more about the life and times and works and pronouncements of Bishop Matthew Kukah. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now, in many ways, Matthew Hassan Kukah is a remarkable Nigerian. He's a Catholic bishop whose seat is in the very heart of the Islamic Caliphate in Sokoto, northwest Nigeria. Yet he feels perfectly at home there and has nurtured and grown a thriving minority Christian community in that region. Born in Kaduna State in northern Nigeria, he speaks several Nigerian languages and has worked harder than most to promote understanding across Nigeria's many ethnic and religious fault lines. He's at once an idealist who believes Nigeria can be a much better country than it is, and a realist who brutally assesses the state of the country's political and developmental level. And Bishop Matthew Hassan Kukah is still with me in the studio. Thank you for staying with us. Let's talk a bit about you. You've developed quite a following across the country and across the ethnic and religious divide. But your critics say that the following is for you and not necessarily for Jesus, whom you serve. How do you respond to that?
I don't know, but you know, the very first people that became some of the followers of Jesus were led to Jesus by somebody else. I don't look back. Frankly, you know, I don't know who is following me because I have not asked anybody to follow me. But I give you one or two examples. You know, one day, and I can tell you so many of these stories. I'm in London. I just arrived London. I entered the train. It waits for a while. And I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I saw this young man running. He jumps over the turnstiles, rushes into the train, and prostrates in front of me. I couldn't tell whether he fell down or whatever. And the white people, everybody is looking at him. But instinctively, he fell right at my feet. But since I'm a Nigerian and he's Yoruba, I suspect that unless I touch his head, he's not going to get up. So I touch his head, and the guy gets up and hugs me. He says, I want to thank you about Oputapa. He goes on and on and on. Now, 3 days ago, I was at the airport here in Abuja, and I stopped to buy newspapers. And I'm buying newspapers, trying to pay for the paper, and there's this gentleman standing beside me. And as I'm trying to reach for my money, he brings out his money. He decides to pay for I had bought a book, and he says, he's going to pay. And I'm looking at him, I don't know him. And he decides to pay for my book. He said, do you want any more books? And I said, no, I'm done. So he pays for my books. And all of a sudden, I see him moving around, and he goes to the ATM. But I'm not really paying attention because the vendor is my friend. So I've known him for more than 10 years. So we're there chatting. All of a sudden, the man comes back and hands me 20,000 naira. And I said, what is this for? He said, no, just... Now, I have all these experiences across the board in Nigeria. I'm not asking anybody to follow me, but if I can lead people to Christ, one of the greatest things that has happened to me is that almost every place I've been to, Pentecostal churches, Muslim environments, the kind of environment you will not expect a Catholic priest to appear in. For me, the greatest validation is people look at me and they say, this is the first time we're encountering a Catholic priest. I went to Babcock University with President Obasanjo. We were there 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I said to the Vice Chancellor, jokingly, I said, I guess I'm the first Catholic priest to enter your university. And the guy nods at me. So, I have all these, as I said, I'm not asking anybody to follow me, but I'm quite humbled by the fact that I meet so many people. And Jesus himself is very clear that I'm seeing him in you and you're seeing him in me. So, but I'm not, if you talk about people following me rather than following Christ, I don't know. I really don't know.
Right. Do you think Nigerian politicians are afraid of you because you are so outspoken and not afraid to look them in the eye and tell them the truth about how they're running this country into the ground?
Look, I must thank the Nigerian politicians and actually a lot of people in the political class because frankly, right across the board, everybody that I've met, most of them, including Abacha, strange as it may sound, have said to me, we appreciate what you're doing, we appreciate what you're saying. In fact, there was a time I delivered a lecture and it was an all political gathering. And when I finished, The secretary to the government then, Alhaji Ahmed Ayele, my very good friend, shook my hand. He said to me in Hausa, you know, you've boiled something and given to us. We know it's bitter, but it is from you, so we will swallow it. You know, I meet a lot of people during Abacha's time. I met a general who said to me, I'm trying to enter a lift. I don't know the man. He pulls me back from the lift. He says, listen, I want to tell you nothing will happen to you in Nigeria. We love you. I am a general in the Nigerian army. We can't say the things you're saying. We appreciate it. I think for me, there is an absence of malice. I think people who want to be fair to me will know that I've never attacked anybody by writing or by speech. But I attack institutions and ideas that I find totally disagreeable, in part because there are things I've also reflected, you know, upon. And I think I have an idea about how a nation ought to be governed. I'm not asking you to run according to the things that, you know, that I expect. But Nigerians don't ask for too much. They're just asking to be left to do the things the rest of the world has come to take for granted. What, sending their children to school, remaining secure, doing the things that they can do. And I think, strangely, you know, I got a text message from a friend of mine who is a very, very important politician, you know, in this government, and it was quite challenging, because the same person and I had a bit of an argument as to, you know, what are you doing? It seems you don't like our party, the APC. Blah. The same person now sends me a text last night, and it's all full of praise and so on and so forth. The point I'm making is that I think the average politician knows. Luckily for me, I was there before many of them. I've been on this road for more than 30 years. And because of the Nigerian political system, so many people are just coming on parachutes. We don't know, with very little tradition. So, and this is why I have zero tolerance, so to say, in the sense that too many people are coming to power without preparation. You know, and if there is anything we can do, which is why I've set up the Kukah Center, if there's anything we can do to improve the quality of governance, to let people understand that, look, there's nothing happening to us that has not happened elsewhere in the world. Do we have the patience to look elsewhere at how people have managed diversity, how people have managed opportunities, how people have managed human beings? You know, these things are all there. So for me, I think that the average politician knows that I speak because I love this country, and you know, what I say is nothing personal.
Now, you set up the Kukah Center. You're trying to make a change in this country. You speak volubly every time you go out. You speak in public. You speak in the media. You've done so much. Nobody can dispute that, to effect reconciliation in Nigeria. The Human Rights Investigation Commission, also known as the Oputa Panel, the National Political Reforms Conference, or the Ogoni Shell Mediation Initiative. Are Nigerians reconciling with one another, or has that energy been expended without result?
You know, I pay credit to I don't want to call him my friend, because I think he's much, much more than that, President Obasanjo. I mean, I give him a lot of praise and credit. Not, you know, for anything, but he gave me an opportunity to put a panel, political reform conference, reconciling the Ogoni people. Yaradua appointed me to the to the committee with Justice Uwais, you know, to review the the electoral laws. In fact, I used to joke that by now I should have something going for me, because I've served 3 justices of the Supreme Court. Justice Uwais, Justice Oputa, Justice Nikitobi. I've served in committees with them. So, you know, for me, this rare opportunity of mixing with Nigerians and having responsibility thrust on you, it has actually made me appreciate the fact that, one, this country has greatness endowed in it. We just have quite a lot of missed opportunities. And I think that perhaps if the politicians really took the time and the trouble to understand that Nigerians ask for so little, things would be completely different. You know, when you talk of reconciliation, look, I mean, I live in Sokoto. You know, I live in Sokoto. And I see, I walk, the Sultan and I, we're pretty good friends. But I walk into his palace. I don't have, he's the one who calls me to say, look, we haven't seen for a long time. What's the problem? And I give you, anecdotal, but it's true. The Bishop of Maiduguri calls me up one day and says, look, you know, about 40-something of my parishes have all been destroyed. My priests are all here. They have no place to go to. I'm asking bishops to take one. I said, give me 3 priests. I'll take them to, you know, bring, and the 3 priests arrived Sokoto. And I called the cathedral administrator. I said, look, please, let's have a dinner. All the priests who are in Sokoto, let's have a dinner with all these guys. And we are in the middle of preparing this dinner. At about 2 or 3, The Sultan calls me. He says, look, where are you? I said, I'm in Sokoto. He said, we haven't seen. Well, come, let's have dinner. I said, no, I can't come. He said, why? I said, look, I have 3 priests who have just come from Maiduguri, displaced by Boko Haram. And so he says to me, well, bring them. I said, no, we are 12 of us because there are other priests. So he said, bring all of. And, it was strange. I had to cancel the dinner. And about 12, 13 of us drive that evening to the Sultan's palace. We sit there, we have dinner. And I said to him jokingly, I say, it is very strange. Here are my priests being chased away by Boko Haram. And here we are sitting in the presence of the Sultan.
I have to say, on that note, that's a very good note to end.
Right.
Bishop Matthew Kukah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charles. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's it for this edition of The Arise Interview. Join us again for a fresh edition tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.